All right, and now I haven't thought of an intro.
Hello!
Keep the recording rolling. We'll figure it out.
I can edit it.
Or we can just leave it raw like this. This is good.
How does the history podcast?
For fuck's sake, let
normally-
me do it. Ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Robot Wars History Podcast, where we get together and discuss key teams and bots. I am your host, Toon Ganondorf, and with me today is...
You missed the joke, man.
Shut
You
the
were supposed to
fuck
call
up.
yourself Luke.
Shut the fuck up.
Come on! Oh, NJG Woo. This is literally a YouTube channel about uploading a children's television program, and you've already brought such profanity into the first 15 seconds.
Guys, we're a minute in. We haven't even fucking started. Do we want me to do this, or do you want to do it again? We'll just keep the recording rolling. But what are we going to do?
Okay, I've got this.
Okay.
I'm
So
ready.
when you're ready to go, you start it.
What are you doing, Mr. Volcano?
Hello, Tyrannosaurus Alan. I'm filling my water with Buxtonicity.
Eh? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tale of the Toaster, presenting you another episode of the Robot Wars History Podcast. If my obscure Volvic and Buxton joke wasn't obvious enough, this is King Buxton Part 2 with...
I'm trying to recover from that introduction. Toon Ganondorf, how are you going, everybody?
And NWeston8/NJGW.
Ah! Stop! No! This is his own YouTube channel, but I make up the pronunciations. He's NJG Woo, and today we're going to talk about King B Powerworks, the new updated version of King B3. Have you ever considered it as King B4? What a mind blower.
I have not ever thought of that. In fact, I've never even thought of it as King B2. We kind of just skipped that one.
So, starting in Series 5 and Extreme, King B Powerworks was now 88 kilograms. Wow. And it was named after its 36-volt motors, which was the highest voltage that the rules would allow. And the cutting disc, whoa, 8,000 RPM in Series 7. That's nearly Pulsar's record.
I mean, if I could see a wind chime in a gale storm, that probably moves at 8,000 RPM as well. But, I mean, that doesn't mean it can cut anything.
You know, my favourite Pokemon is a wind chime. Not my absolute favourite, but...
You would like Chime Echo. You like that suits you.
It's the sound it makes when you knock it out, just the really dismal ding-da-ding. It just makes me want to shed a tear slightly.
Do we have a recording on how long it's taken us to go completely off topic already? King B Powerworks and 101 return to defend their Tag Team Terra title, and they go up against Deator and Megamorg.
And by all accounts, this should have been a total free win for the reigning champions. What went wrong, Nick?
First of all, deciding to host the tag team at all in Extreme 1 was what went wrong. Because this...
It's true, it was a shunt show.
Because this tournament was, as you've just said, a shunt show. What says a lot about this tournament is this is one of the better fights because there's actually drama and there's not 2 random breakdowns before cease.
It's true.
Yeah.
And Megamorg wins a fight in its extreme version.
It is very sad to see the reigning champions go down like this because they were... I mean, as much as I love the Bulldog Breed, Robo Chicken team, and some of the other teams that have won, this is the team that just feels right that they were a team, that they won, and this is the trophy that these 2 robots, aside from the Best Engineered Award that Anarchy won later on, that this is the trophy that they have. So yeah, it felt right that they won, and it's very sad for them to have lost so easily, and to not even against... It's very easy to forget that Deator wasn't paired with Pussycat when they took down the reigning champions. Even if that had been the case, it would have been more salvageable, but they lose to Megamorg.
Yeah, because of course Pussycat did nothing in that Tag Team Terra at all. Deator won it single-handedly, just as Bulldog Breed would go on to do the next year. except just without people noticing. And this is, of course, a King B podcast, so we have to point out the fact that this loss was entirely King B's fault. 101 went the distance. It got flipped by Dieter a few times, but it was beating Megamorg individually. But King B just shunt the bed. It just went mad.
I like that we've got all these creative uses, and every single joke we can come up with is just a different word for shunt being substituted. We're so creative.
While I have the chance to shit on 101, I will shunt on 101.
Yeah, you'll smeg on 101.
Sure, King B did what King B always does, but 101's track freezes in this fight too. They almost happened simultaneously as far as I can remember. Not that I rewatch Extreme Series 1's tag team battles that often, but yeah.
So the key thing obviously in this fight is the berserking that we see from King B Powerworks. That it happens in another fight as well, doesn't it?
What, King B going out of control?
Well, we'll get to that in the very next fight. But so that went to a judge's decision, despite the fact both of the robots were basically dead. But the champions are done, and so then they decide to take it out upon themselves. And the classic rivalry between King B and 101 is brought back to life again.
I love this rivalry. It's just so whimsical and fun. But this is just the worst of the three matches between 101 and King B Powerworks. The first fight, as you guys mentioned last time, had that real close sense. Simon later said that it was probably one of the best fights he had. The second one had that vengeance stage, and it was actually quite a good fight.
And it was actually at an important stage of the competition as well, a heat final.
Whereas the vengeance tournament in general was mostly, with an exception of this one and maybe one or two others, was really just a gimmicky space filler.
Yeah, like the feeling when Bigger Brother versus Common Getterix was the second most justified vengeance match, apart from Razor Pussycat and King B 101. But yeah, it's a decent opening 30 seconds. They try pushing each other, and 101's clearly showing itself to be better, actually using its new wedges to get underneath for once. But King B just packs in and goes mental.
This is not the third worst fight between these two. This is the fourth worst fight, because their very short-lived tussle after winning the tag team in Series 4 is better. Which says quite a lot.
Oh my god. So, there are just as many contested fights between King B and 101 as there are King B and Dan Tomkia fights.
Oh, wow.
Let's get the new rivalry going.
Yeah, new rivalry, absolutely. That's the one that everyone's dying for. The newest rematch between Dan Tomkia and King B Powerworks, or King B Remix.
But that's further down the line. So yeah, it makes for a good, meme in the Doodles videos when King B goes mental to some music. But ultimately, it's one of the only swift pittings we ever see from Sergeant Bash.
Oh.
And then Simon Harrison is forced to admit that 101 is the better robot. And that was that. They never got to fight again.
Simon Harrison still kept the trophy, though. He didn't admit that back. The second half of Extreme 1, let's just skip past that first. We got them out of the way. Second half of Extreme 1 for King B Powerworks is actually a lot better. Starting with one of my personal favourite King B Powerworks fight, King Buxton fight. And those who don't know, King Buxton ranks in my personal 10 favourite robots. My favourite fight is the Wildcard Warriors fight with Draven. Now, Draven, for those who don't know, was recently discovered that Draven was meant to fight Pussycat, which of course just feels more in line with the rest of the Wildcard Warrior tournament, which was just overpowered robots versus newbies.
Yeah, and I could have honestly believed this being intentional. I certainly thought back in the day they'd intentionally picked a robot where the newcomer could beat it, because Draven always struck me as the most impressive of the newcomers, apart from Axor.
Yeah, that's right. Well, no one's saying that about Draven so much these days.
No.
But back then, it had a weapon that looked like a weapon.
And its opponent fit just right into the jaw perfectly. Draven could have actually had a great fight here.
Yeah, it was pretty neat lineup, and it ends up being a pretty mediocre fight until the end, which it pretty much pulls off exactly what people deep down, without realizing it, like I had the first time I saw it, realized King B probably had that in it, but it manages to get underneath Draven, hook it up, push it into the pit release, and does the panic attack maneuver and dumps Draven into the pit. And it's a really neat bit of driving, and it's really quite an enjoyable fight.
You're so used to seeing King B zipping around the arena being this reckless, uncontrollable mess, a bit like Simon Harrison himself. No disrespect, I love the guy, but to see some precision and care behind what King B does, it really is great, and I understand why you like it so much.
Well, it's my favourite of the King B fights. It doesn't necessarily mean much, given there's probably 4 or 5 that are really objectively good. But anyway, yeah, it's a neat little...
You know, the very next battle it would have in Extreme is superb.
Really is. And as we mentioned on the Napalm podcast, King B Powerworks here changes history by denying Tornado being an inevitable romp winner of yet another Extreme 1 tournament.
Thank you, King B Powerworks. I could not have coped with... The second Annihilator in Extreme was genuinely one of only 3 or 4 episodes in the whole season to not have Tornado in it. So thank Christ that King B just rams into the side of Tornado in this fight and actually kills it dead.
To be honest, although the Steel Avenger does progress in this, and it's one of its better performances, I would have preferred that Annihilator to have King B in it. It's because King B does the job in killing Tornado, and only recently it has crept into my mind, King B would have been a genuinely good contender for that Annihilator.
Like, they wouldn't have died in one flip to Spirit of Nightmare. We might have even managed to see the actual knockout on Panic Attack.
You know what? It actually, given that Panic Attack did die, it's not infeasible that King B Powerworks could have survived to come second.
Yeah, I definitely don't think they could have won, but they could have been finalists, and that would have probably been the biggest achievement they got since top 8 in Series 2.
I'm pretty sure they would have been runners-up. I mean, Spirit of Nightmare is hardly renowned for its tough armor, let's be fair.
No. It died. Spirit of Nightmare / Series 4 Nightmare has a very poor track record of taking hits. Like, it was very lucky to get through the 2 battles it did in the Annihilator. It lost very easily in Series 4 and in the Mayhem. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that King B Powerworks could have gotten on there. And if it had, those free wins...
You just have to assume that Judge Shred 2.5 was just not available, because they clearly earned the place in the Annihilator more than Spirit of Nightmare did. They must have just left.
Yeah. And so with King B Powerworks, if it had, got those free wins over Hippopotamus and Spirit of Nightmare, and then maybe even Panic Attack later on, it would have had a higher win record than loss record, which it currently has at 11 wins to 12 losses.
Oh, wow. It totally would have, wouldn't it? But instead, Steel Avenger gets it, and we have to talk about how Steel Avenger actually did win the fight, because what swung it in the end was that although King B was arguably on top, Steel Avenger comes in with a big slam, using its bladed front onto King B's wheel, and actually tears the whole thing off. And it does go to a judge's decision, but King B's taken that damage, while Steel Avenger doesn't really have any, apart from what it took against Tornado.
And Matilda, obviously.
This is a bit of a side point about Extreme 1 in general, but this fight is sensational to watch. It's so fast-paced and energetic, and yet still the show feels the need to ham up this Matilda damage and say that the judges shouldn't count it because Steel Avenger was only on the red warning strip. Like, when have they ever been that precise in what constitutes being in and out the CPZ before? Why are we being so strict here? It's just something. It's like with Behemoth being ganged up on by Dead Metal twice. It was a decent fight between it and Hypnodisc, and then we have unnecessary extreme nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, the Dead Metal Behemoth thing happened because this was like episode 2, and so Refbot's yellow card feature hadn't even been broadcast yet. You can see that with the American episodes as well. They're particularly keen to show off Refbot's yellow card feature in the first few episodes, so they want the audience to know it. But here, yeah, like, I think Matilda's attack was... It's okay to say that Steel Avenger, if, say, it couldn't self-right and lost as a result, then it's okay to let it go to the judge's decision and give it a fair chance. But the more I think about it, yeah, the Steel Avenger was actually getting bullied by Tornado for a good minute, and then they do drive into Matilda's flywheel. Maybe King B should have won after all.
I think this is the only occasion in a melee-type format where the robot that's getting beaten up a lot actually progresses. Because we've seen robots like...
Hang on, Chopper.
Attila the Drum. We've seen robots like Attila the Drum go out on a judge's decision. Things like... I mean, a less controversial one, but things like Cobra, which really try and get into the fight and still get beaten up enough to constitute a loss. Here, King B was so out of the picture, and although the Steel Avenger was taking massive damage, it was still flailing away with its axe and being aggressive enough as such that getting beaten up did probably see it get through, funnily enough.
It's actually very true. I'm actually rewatching the fight on silent while we're recording this, and Tornado just bullies Steel Avenger from the start, and King B's just sort of is in pursuit. So King B's not gaining any points, but it's not losing any points either. And then it just comes in and it hits Tornado clean on the side and kills it in one hit. Like, that's it. Tornado never moves again after that stab.
No.
I feel like those should have been serious damage points, at least comparable with losing a wheel, which didn't even immobilize King B Powerworks.
I was just about to bring that up. Like, just because the damage that kills Tornado isn't major visible damage, it immobilized a robot.
I think in unison we've all just had this kind of second podcast in a row where we've just had a huge realization. Last time it was GBH, and this time...
This was on my list of fights that did not accurately characterize a robot's involvement. I mean, this is probably King B's finest moment outside of series, 2 or 3. Probably even finest moment ever, considering the caliber of robot it beat. And it didn't even get to have a win notched up on its record to
And
to
then
show
what's
for
also funny is that in the Annihilator, Craig Charles, when he speaks to the Steel Avenger after they come forth, he was like, "Oh, you were one of my favourites to win it." He actually saw the Steel Avenger as one of the favourites to win the whole Annihilator, along with Panic Attack.
Well, you know what? It was at least the third best robot in the Annihilator, so that doesn't mean anything. It probably was one of the favourites if you take out Disco and Panic Attack. But yeah, the thing that's nicest about King B beating Tornado is that I'm fairly sure Tornado took a lot of inspiration from King B. And so it's really nice to see King B say, well, you know what? You're up-and-comer, but you know what? We still know what we're doing, and we still have this design. We still know what we're doing with it.
And you don't have any tungsten-tipped spikes, which I'm going to bury into your robot.
Extreme 1 gets its fair bit of shit. Its fair bit of shunt, we know that. But this is one time where they ham up. This is the one time in the pits when they ham up things, and I genuinely find myself laughing at it because they have this non-serious yet could be serious argument between the King B team and Team Tornado over who did the things best first, and this argument over power in their motors, and Brian Moss trying to trash talk, it's perfect. If you ever need anything in your life, you watch that pre-battle interview.
Duly noted.
So we're done with Extreme 1? Any last comments?
We better move on.
I think we summarised that pretty well in the end.
I think we did well. So Series 5, King B Powerworks is stuck in an overstuffed heat of quality. We've got Dominator 2 is the heat favourite. Exterminator 2 is the de facto second place. Then you've got 13 Black, who would become a semi-finalist.
Yes.
We've got King B Powerworks, who was a former semi-finalist. We've got Chronic, who was a heat finalist. Corkscrew, who would eventually become the heat finalist.
And of course, the winner of the Best Engineered Award, Derek!
Oh yes, mustn't forget Derek. But yeah, heavy quality, and King B is drawn up against Chronic 2, who is much more refined than its Series 4 version, which wasn't a bad robot by any standards. But it just cleans the floor with Chronic 2.
When we're talking about King B's high moments, this was again possibly it. This is certainly the last big win King B ever has, in that they take a heat finalist, unlucky to not be seeded, very improved design as well, something that I would have probably guessed would win in the sense of Chronic 2. It's already getting that Apollo shape now.
King B Powerworks lost to Atomic, so it's not outside the realm of possibility that it would lose to Chronic 2.
Yeah, like, I just thought it's such a precise wedge shape that they could have had it, but King B, it uses ramming spikes to actually just break through the steel armor of Chronic 2 on several occasions, and so they just have full control over it. They even at one point get a lift, not by sticking the spikes under the robot, but by sticking the spikes into Chronic 2 and then lifting it up.
And it's all the aggression, all the control there. It absolutely plays with Chronic 2. It's quite an impressive display, and Chronic 2 never recovers from it.
Yeah, I mean, it does manage to hang on to a judge's decision, but it was lucky to.
Oh, it is one of the most one-sided judges' decisions ever. It really is that dominant, and if you're considering individual impressive driving displays, I know it's not going to be one to pop to your head to go for a first-round battle in Series 5, but this is a seriously impressive blend of precision, tactics, and just pure aggression. It really is a joy to watch this battle, and
yeah, it really is. It's very neat.
Even though I don't enjoy this heat as much as I should do, because I feel the battles often fall a little bit flat, this is one where I think, yeah, Series 1 had some decent fights early on too, didn't it? It wasn't just the Steel Avenger beating up the Tartan Terror.
But yeah, so then with Chronic 2 promptly defeated, I don't think anybody expected King B Powerworks to go any further on into the tournament. It would have been nice to see them draw Exterminator or... would have had to be Exterminator.
King B was so dominant against Chronic, while Corkscrew narrowly won a battle it arguably should have lost against 13 Black, because they were immobile at the end and 13 Black was only dragging them around. Why did Corkscrew then get the easier matchup against Exterminator, while King B has to bite the bullet against Dominator? I don't really get that.
And the thing is, neither Dominator nor Exterminator really had round 1 fights that were even close to as impressive as King B Powerworks as either. I mean, Derek broke down and Immortalis had its globe shattered, but that's it. I mean, King B had the best first round fight.
I would honestly say Exterminator probably had the worst display, because they flipped themselves over while fighting Immortalis, and in the end Immortalis only dies genuinely because they drove into Shunt's CPZ of its own accord and killed itself.
Yeah, I was going to link into a part just before that I heard. We were obviously, for the 4 that were remaining, Toast was saying the draw was a little bit mystifying. And when you think Dominator 2 it ended up facing Corkscrew because Exterminator flopped. When you think about it, why wouldn't Corkscrew be placed up against Dominator 2? When is Dominator 2 likely to bottle a fight? The worst case scenario is Dominator 2 ends up fighting either one of King B and Exterminator. Like, that's a good heat final on paper, no matter who wins that fight. Because Dominator 2 is not going to lose to Corkscrew. And then you get two big names in the heat final
And
either
then you
way.
add another layer because Exterminator was running low on battery throughout that fight. So we could have actually had King B in the heat final.
Guys, we've just had an epiphany of how much King B came close to greatness in the second half of its career anyway. Get ready for how King B almost won Series 8 later on in this podcast.
I mean, when you think about it, since the weight increase, does King B ever really properly let itself down? I mean, first part of Extreme, sure, it has these bad technical issues, but after that, it's very close calls that it gets really unlucky with for the most part.
Well, certainly a couple early on in its Series 5 Extreme 1 career.
Yeah.
But anyway, for whatever reason, it ends up against Dominator 2. The only sort of redeemable part about this taking place in the second round is that it's nice that both King B and 101 got to fight Dominator 2, and they both put up a pretty decent fight. The weapon disparity was the reason why King B lost this. King B probably takes less damage than 101 does. It's harder to tell on the clear armor than on 101's silver armor, but yeah, it keeps moving, it's rolling around, it tries to get a couple of grinds in, never really gets a good lift on. That's probably the main thing with King B Powerworks. It never, with the exception of Draven and Chronic, its forks are down, but it doesn't even really attempt to lift them up.
No, it doesn't seem to be low enough, sharp enough, or have enough range on the weapon, really.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't really have enough confidence that they could win this match. They weren't trying as hard as they were last time.
I think in this particular fight especially, they thought that if they tried to control Dominator 2, they'd probably still lose on damage points because of Dominator's weapon. So they thought, let's try and bring the cutting saw into play, but Dominator 2 is far too robust to even flinch.
I mean, you had to be Hypnodisc, or you had to be Hypnodisc to get through that Dominator 2 armor in Series 5. I mean, even Wild Thing only won over it because it had the exposed wheels back then.
Yeah, and even those wheels barely took any visible damage. It certainly didn't immobilize Dominator. But that pretty much wraps up King B Powerworks' Fifth Wars campaign, and so at this point, you would naturally move on to talking about the Sixth Wars. But something went a little wrong here.
Oh, man.
Grudge match. A grudge match with the least likely grudge match you would expect. A rematch of the Series 4 Tag Team Terror Final between Scorpion and King B Powerworks is in the qualifiers.
Yeah, because we all remember that time King B pressed into Scorpion in the tag team final and then it stopped moving, or maybe it was 101, I don't really remember.
Oh, Scorpion never forgot it.
They just come back with a brand new machine with an actually competent spinning disc. It's specifically Spirit of Scorpion this year. And although we never saw it, from what we understand, Spirit of Scorpion absolutely tore apart King B Powerworks in the qualifiers for Series 6. And King B doesn't get in. And that was it for their Series 6 campaign.
You couldn't find one Series 6 robot that you could kick out for King B Powerworks. Like, I refuse to believe
But even then,
that.
I refuse to believe that the producers didn't offer a place to Sacromalot in the following series when that got mutilated by Scorpion in the qualifiers. I think Sacromalot was just too damaged to be in Series 7, and so you have to wonder if King B was the same. Were they actually not even able to accept a place? But either way...
That's what I genuinely hope. Because...
You know, we live in the days when the producers kick off TR2 and Ironside 3 for coming third, so it's hard to keep the same standard up as to whether or not they would accept King B. But
You know where I stand on TR2, so it's very hard to look at a world where Colossus is in Series 6 and UFO.
but you see, Colossus
and-
was a school entry, so they get the frostbite way of getting onto the show.
True.
It's
They do get the frostbite way in.
It's hard to look at.
But anyway, yeah, so all those robots make it in. King B Powerworks for reasons unknown. Possible damage, possible just simply not chosen. Don't make it into Series 6.
Yeah, look, they don't even appear in Extreme 2. Imagine the tag team terror with King B Powerworks and Anarchy. That would have been insane.
That would have been beautiful. They could have contended. I mean, they would have lost against Bulldog Breed easily. But I tell you what, they would have certainly given most of those teams a run. Exterminator and Mini Morg, I reckon they probably would have beaten. Lightning and Steel Avenger, they would have beaten. Hydra and Barbaric Response, maybe.
Yeah, but as a result, we end up with a fraudulent pair up with your own robot partnership of Velociraptor and Mighty Mouse.
Yep, because that's fair.
Well, that was a neat little gimmicky thing, but yeah, no, you're right. It's not what we all were clamouring to see. It would have been a nice way for King B. Well, would have been a nice way for Anarchy to go out, I suppose. King B Powerworks didn't actually retire after that, as we're about to keep discussing.
Yeah, because indeed, they've got it in their minds to qualify for Robot Wars, the 7th Wars, and that cash pot of over £20,000! And so in order to be in with a chance of getting that £20,000 prize, they have to go through the qualifiers once again in an all-time Robot Wars classic between...
Okay, guys. Just before we let Toast continue this section, we would like you to go have a coffee break, prepare your tea, prepare any food necessary, and sit back and listen for the next half an hour as one of our favourite guests goes into depth about an all-time classic Robot Wars affair. I will leave it with you, Toast.
Toast is about to mention that there was actually very little impact on this fight from King B Powerworks, but don't you worry, you'll get a blow-by-blow from it anyway.
Right. So, yeah, this was the reason I chose to be in the King Buxton podcast, not gonna lie, because my favourite robot is a certain legend called M2. I love that boy. M2 in Series 7, it makes me smile. And you know what? How few things there are in this world that make me smile. M2 can do it, baby. And so they have a qualifier battle with King B Powerworks, New Blood Heat finalist Pressure, and the ever-present Thunderpants. And so, well, only there can only be one outright winner. But first of all, as you would expect, Thunderpants is the first to go. But hey, at least it moved. That was more than it did in Series 7. We got to see Thunderpants move in footage that was only released to the public eye earlier this year. We got 2 new series of Robot Wars this year. We got Series 9 and 10. But who cares? Because we also got to see M2 versus King B Powerworks versus Pressure versus Thunderpants. And just look at those high quality screenshots on your screen right now. You could tell everything that's happening. But so, King B gets to drive on top of the beaten Thunderpants a bit, but it's already becoming clear that M2 is winning the fight, because they've flipped Pressure at least once, and King B's trying to pressure them, but they've just got such a high ground clearance that M2 pretty much spends 3 minutes flipping it around the arena. Eventually M2 kills Pressure, and so M2 and King B Powerworks are the only robots still mobile at the end of 3 minutes. Despite the fact King B was stranded on the wall, they narrowly break free in time to avoid a KO, and Cease is called by the klaxon. Presumably M2 was the winner by a mile, but King B Powerworks did enough to qualify for Series 7. I'll get my coat and hang back to these lads now who can talk about the actual televised battles, which don't matter nearly as much.
Oh,
I wonder if this is how Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward felt after they broke the Watergate story. Just that sheer level of enjoyment. They were just telling all their friends and family all about it. It was just the,
Do you want to go for like a first-person view of M2's journey through the battle?
Maybe we'll save that bit for later on. But anyway, King B Powerworks, relatively unchanged for Series 7. There's not a whole lot of... Yeah, it does have a different body shape. Not particularly well prepared for this. Dan isn't here. Dan was busy playing video games when we chose to record this, so we don't have the stats on hand. So anyway, King B Powerworks ends up in a first round melee with its arch rival, Dan Tomkia, as well as Hasik's Hog 2 and Rick.
It's a good fight as well.
Yeah.
I really enjoy this battle because it's obviously very dominant from Dan Tomkia. It's one of the only fights where Dan Tomkia doesn't win by getting an Uta.
and it's while it's one of the only battles Dan Tomkia doesn't get an out of the arena in, it's also one of the only battles where it's entertaining in. Sorry, I'll let you continue.
Why does this guy own the several thousand subscriber channel about Robot Wars? His opinions are okay. At least he thinks Series 7's the best series, like me. But sometimes he just slips in a little bad one every now and again. Like, I can't bring up the Exterminator example anymore. It's been crushed. Can't believe it. But what makes this battle especially fun is not focusing on Dan Tomkia's dominance, but rather the fact that between King B Powerworks and Rick, both of them survive to a judge's decision. And throughout the battle, Rick is picked upon by Dan Tomkia while King B is generally not. Like, there's it was one of my finest subtle jokes on the wiki, actually. I put a picture of King B literally on top of Dan Tomkia in the battle, and the caption for it is, King B Powerworks is carried by Dan Tomkia. And you can just take it out of context, and it's completely true.
What do you mean, take it out of context? That's exactly in
you're
context.
right. King B does very little in this fight, but it goes back to the earlier example that Luke and Nick mentioned about the Steel Avenger, where the judges had to choose between a robot which arguably did a little more in terms of offense, that being Rick, but they get picked upon by, say, Dan Tomkia. Or you go for King B Powerworks, which didn't do very much throughout, but it kept its composure, and it still did push Rick into the CPZ at the very end. Like, Rick gets its highlight in the fact that it flips Dan Tomkia over altogether, but at the end of the fight, it's genuinely a split decision, 2-1, to put King B Powerworks through over Rick.
I mean, I'm glad King B Powerworks went through. I like the thing that at this point in time, King B Powerworks has never lost in the first round of the UK Championship. Never. 101 can't say that. Razor can't say that.
Hey, Rick had a consistent heat final success level.
Yeah.
But it's also...
It's just so charming that King B Powerworks gets to retain this stat forever, seemingly, unless it comes back in another series, because it just never loses in round one. Ever. And that's what I love about this decision, even though it's definitely questionable, arguable. Maybe Rick should have gone through.
Just maybe. It's not a battle that was inherently wrong, and you can see by there being a split decision.
For all of the shunt that Robot Wars gets about the editing of battles sometimes, this is one where you can absolutely fully understand why it's a split decision from the action we've seen. Because, as we say, Rick...
Yeah, I mean, because they're not choosing a winner, they're choosing a runner-up. And when one robot's so dominant, you've got to pick a runner-up. Sometimes it's hard. There aren't that many decisions out there where there's... I mean, you've probably got Aftershock and Sabretooth beating Cranky and tomahawk, there's a clear 1 and 2, and then a clear 3 and 4. But when you've got there's some times where you've got 2 and 3 are close, and 1 and 4 are separate.
And that brings me back to a point that I've really wanted to bring up, which is so charming, in that this is a battle where King B narrowly scrapes through on a judge's decision based on being the less active player in a melee. May I then bring you back to King B3 versus Attila the Drum versus Medusa 2000, where it was the total opposite, where King B3 was the Dan Tomkia in that fight, and then the judges arguably got it wrong by eliminating Attila the Drum. Now Rick is the Attila the Drum, potentially, while King B is the Medusa 2000 that did very little, but makes it through. It's funny how the world closes back in on itself.
Does close back in on itself. But the saddest thing is, whoever was going to win here, Rick or King B Powerworks, the loser was going to be both of them, because they had to go up against IG88. And there's that one image of IG88 approaching King B Powerworks, and I find myself bracing myself for the pain, like it's going to inflict pain upon me watching that impact, because it just looks so painful.
As Simon Harrison said right before the battle, King B was brought up in a much more tender age, and you just feel for it here. It's so ruthlessly beaten.
Yeah, they took a whacking. Do we think that King B Powerworks could beat Vader?
Vader is not a very good robot, so I mean, I don't really know.
It's not that bad.
I mean, I agree with him, so...
Vader was very unreliable. It was at IG88, but maybe I don't know. Possibly not, probably not. I mean, it just depends on whether Vader broke down or not.
But nonetheless, so King B, they've made it to the second round in place of Rick, but for it they get a total punishing from IG88, which was the moment that IG88 sealed itself as a memorable robot for a lot of people, because it was only in one series with 2 wins and then one extremely quick loss, but people remember that robot, and this was why it devastated King B. Also, something else
Well, the thing is, I've just...
my point's going to seem so minor now. I was just going to point out the fact that this is not the robot that we used to call King B Powerworks in Series 7. It had a slightly different name in Series 7 called King B Powerworks, with speech marks on either side of the word Powerworks on the stat board for some reason. It was only in Series 7 that they do it that way. They just call it King B Powerworks.
And that is truly essential grammar that we need to add to all of King B's Series 7 battles on the wiki. We need to up that standard of grammar.
Let's get that sorted now, lads. King B Powerworks.
It was up to Toast. Toast wanted to split Storm 2 with a space from Storm 2 without a space, so, you know...
I thought you were going to say I want a separate article for only the King B Powerworks in speech marks, separate from the one from Series 5.
No. But anyway, yeah, so interestingly enough, you rewatch the fights, King B Powerworks doesn't die on the first hit, which I thought it did. I remembered the fight wrong. It actually takes 4 or 5 blows before the one giant hit that kills it.
Which is good. It shows some durability, but by the end of it...
It's something.
By the end of it, this was pretty much one of 2 highlights that Sergeant Bash got in the whole series. It just eats King B Powerworks completely. Sergeant Bash gets to pick on it quite a lot. They did in the 101 Vengeance battle as well, and now here they just get to melt it again. But hey, it's not all over for King B Powerworks yet, because they do actually get another competition in the 7th Wars.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah, this first round battle especially is why... I mean, I don't want to go too hard in, but why I have a slight disliking for Dan Tomkia.
Let me take back what I just said. I like the tournament. I like almost all the fights, except for the two that Dan Tomkia gets out of the arena flips in. For some reason, I just don't like them. It's just, and especially this one.
I mean, I'm going to disagree.
Something about it, it's boring.
It feels scripted.
It's just they're over so quick. It does. It feels scripted, and I'm pretty sure that Mike Lambert implied in a quote that the whole thing was staged, which I found very strange. But then I spoke to Kane Aston about it, and he said, no, it wasn't staged at all. What are you talking about? But yeah, Mike Lambert sort of implied that both out of the arena flips were staged by the producers who wanted lots of out of the arena flips. But yeah, I don't think that's actually the case.
What he was saying was that he was saying in the control booth that somebody was telling him, right, you've got to flip them out of the arena. It's like, Behemoth was probably in.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, I mean, that doesn't mean that, like, just because you're told to do it doesn't mean you can actually do it. I mean, what if you told Barbaric Response to try and go get an Udo because we set cameras out over there? Okay, yeah, I'll go give it a go. It doesn't mean he's going to be able to do it.
What
it's a bad example because Barbaric Response can't get out of the arena flips, but
yeah, I mean,
anyway, bad example.
And what about if you told Eruption to beat Carbide? I mean, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's a better example. Much better example.
But anyway, we are, of course, talking about the All-Stars in Series 7, if we didn't make that clear. And King B Powerworks has a second fight in its history against Dan Tomkia, as well as Pussycat and Behemoth. But despite the fact we talk about Dan Tomkia's involvement so much, the battle on King B's part was pretty much 100% waged against Pussycat. It fought Pussycat until it died. Ultimately, it was Pussycat using its twin blades that sliced into King B and snapped its right drivetrain. Pussycat was the one that killed it while Dan Tomkia was busy dealing with Behemoth, which, might I add, is not an easy thing to do, to pin a mobile Behemoth into a corner and flip it out of the arena. I think that deserves a lot of credit.
Save it for the Dan Tomkia podcast. Nick and I will not be on that podcast.
Okay.
So you can talk about Dan Tomkia.
No, my mic will not work for that episode.
But nonetheless,
But I just want to say,
Go ahead.
I'd like to point something out for those of you, which is pretty much everybody except for Toast and Nick, those of you out there listening who don't keep up to date with recent changes on the Robot Wars wiki, I recently made contact with the team from Bulldog Breed, which gave us an interesting bit of news in that it's been widely accepted, as we knew, that this was a veterans tournament, which is why we had King B Powerworks and Cat 3 instead of Tornado and some of the other all-star robots out there. And so Dan Tomkia being in there to make up the numbers, but we knew that some robots couldn't take part, like Supernova weren't invited and Terahertz was still disqualified, but Bulldog Breed confirmed to me that they actually weren't approached. So it means that there were conscious choices to pick King B Powerworks for this tournament. It wasn't that they wanted Spawn Again and Thermidor 2, but they couldn't do it, so they picked King B Powerworks. There was a choice made to have King B Powerworks in this
And it's
tournament,
a good one.
which I find strange, but also
Because
kind
it
of
never
nice.
got to be in an All-Stars up to this point.
No, it didn't.
But here they are. But ultimately, after Pussycat killed them, Dan Tomkia flipped their lifeless corpse over the arena wall in a flip that I enjoyed. And they're out in the first round. Meaning that their current record with their new rival Dan Tomkia is 1 loss and 1 joint qualification. So do we want to say who they fought in King B Remix's first fight in Series 8 then? First, we should probably talk about King B Remix itself for a bit, in that it is still very much a similar machine to King B Powerworks. It's gone back to that box shape that wasn't used by King B Powerworks, in inverted commas, but they've also gotten rid of the cutting disc at the back. They've probably just realised it couldn't get through any Hardox robot ever. And instead they've just got thick HDPE at the back to try and protect it. And for some reason, now the lifting forks are lifting drills, which actually spin slowly.
Because everyone knows, everyone looked at Ming Dynasty and said, more.
Let's turn those static spikes into Ming dynasties. And
But yeah, there was also a very strange left turn in King B Remix's identity, in that they brought Simon's wife Natsuko onto the team, and she acted as the translator. And King B Powerworks is now a living entity with a spiritual identity who speaks to the team.
Yeah.
It was probably one of the most confusing things since Shane Swan's love of dogs in Series 10, even though it came before. It's up there with the most confusing things, like Shane
it does
Swan's
also
love
help
of
a
dogs
lot in the sense
Series
that
10.
King B Remix now has Japanese text and a Japanese flag on it. So in theory, they could represent Japan in an international special if they so wanted. And I found the whole Japanese thing quite charming, and Natsuki was a charming person in general who I'd like to see in.
She was good in the interviews. I liked her. And it's nice when they have those sorts of little bit different things for their pre-battle interview. I mean, when you don't have anything really to contribute, you end up with Dara making jokes about how your name can't be said in a Prince drop
We
beat.
knew it was coming.
King B Remix. No.
Okay, that would have been the one where it would have actually been fitting. You know, I can understand the idea of King B Remix being shouted by Prince before entering the battle. You know, King B Remix! Dooms, 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 dooms. That was where the bloody stupid Hobgoblin interview should have been then. Would have actually made more sense here. But if you don't know what we're talking about, the three of us kind of take the mickey out of Dara O'Brien for having a really poor interview with Hobgoblin in episode 5 of Series 10. He was just not funny in his scathing joke about Hobgoblin's name not sounding like a Prince song. But, so the battle begins against Glitterbomb and Overdoser, and it is actually, as Luke said, while Dan Tomke is busy with Glitterbomb, King B gets the free pass award of the year, and they get the opportunity to pick on a barely functioning wooden robot. They crash into it once and immobilize it. And by the time that King B was done picking on the corpse of Overdoser, Dan Tomke had almost finished with Glitterbomb. I think King B gets flipped by Dan Tomke once. Now, they turn themselves over when they drive onto Glitterbomb, but ultimately Dan Tomke is chasing that pink machine and eventually flips it over so it can't self-right, meaning King B Remix gets a somewhat lucky progression into the second round of Series 8, but it can't be said they didn't earn it. They killed a robot. It was just a lucky draw.
They did. They defeated a robot, which is more than you can say for some robots that are in Series 8.
Give me an F. Give me an O. Don't give me any more. I don't want to spell it.
Now, Series 8 was enjoyable.
Yeah, I get who you're talking about. Sorry, I was a bit slow there. I know who
Series
you're talking about.
8 was an enjoyable return on the whole. But honestly, when you compare King B's first round melee in Series 8 and Series 7, honestly, I'd say the Series 7 one features the better spread of robots. Because the Hassix Hog, sure, it isn't good, but it would outlast Overdoser.
Yep.
And Glitterbomb is not very good, and Rick at least survives the whole fight after being flipped around a lot.
And contributed
Honestly,
to the battle as well.
Yes. So it does show in some cases this is a pretty glaring example of just how rushed Series 8 had to be in places. For the,
I mean, Overdoser wasn't meant to be in this battle originally. It was meant to be in there with Thor and Disconstructor and Tough as Nails, one of those kind of fights. I think it was that. Yeah, it was meant to be in place of Disconstructor against Shockwave, Tough as Nails, and Thor, but it didn't work, and it eventually got moved here for a limp breakdown against King B Remix.
And in the same heat,
we managed to amazingly get 3 battles in a row in this robot's career with Dan Tomke in it. It had All-Stars Round 1 with Dan Tomke. then the Series 8 Round 1 melee with Dan Tomkier, and then after that they get their 4th ever fight against Dan Tomkier.
And it goes pretty much as all the other ones did. Dan Tomkier briefly gets stuck on the spikes, but otherwise it's pretty much just a romp. It ends in a neat enough bit of flipping. It pins King B Remix between the arena pit tire protrusion and the arena wall.
Like, if it was Series 7, it's very clear that a flip of that strength would have had King B Remix out of the arena completely. But in this new arena, in quite an awkward wall to try and go for the flip, King B Remix just about stays in, but instead they slot between the pit and the wall, and they're dead. They did get a little lift on Dan Tomkier at one point, but they're gone now. And so they're counted out without it being shown on screen. And eventually, rather than making it a formality, they just bring Matilda in to get the first televised Uta in the new series.
Dan Tomkier's flipper is really not very suited for out of the arena flips in the new series.
No, it was never going to happen again.
Is it just me that thinks that?
King B almost
it needed
went
to really
out.
get that Behemoth or Hypnodisc or Chaos 2, where they pin them in the corner and sort of flip them sideways.
Yeah,
Doesn't
exactly.
really suit them for this one.
Dan Tomkier's flipper lip is designed to flick sideways. Yeah. It's never designed for explosive flips.
Because you can even see that in the earlier battle we mentioned against Rick. They try to get it out of the arena, but they're not doing it in the corner. They're doing it in the central walls, and so it stays in quite firmly. Yeah, the closest failed Uta in the history of the show, along with like Apollo and TR2. Terahertz is completely on the brink, but at least this battle does end in an Uta, in that Matilda does the flip that Dan Tomkier probably couldn't, because King B was in such an awkward position. Dan Tomkier couldn't even get his flipper underneath it because the robot's so wide, but Matilda easily could. And so that was unfortunately going to be the first of several losses for King B Remix, because next they've got the up-and-coming Big Nipper.
The thing with Big Nipper, I reckon it would have been so much more interesting as a fight if Big Nipper had kept the Crusher. If only Big Nipper hadn't tried the Crusher against TR2 and failed, I reckon they would have stuck with it. And I reckon that would have been a great fight. Can you just imagine Big Nipper pinching King B Remix and picking it up into the air and driving around with it? It would have been
but even that, just
beautiful
trying
sight.
to pick apart the wheels with the claws would have been good enough. And it's not to say that this is a bad battle. It is quite cool to see how Big Nipper chucks King B Remix up and causes it to lose dandruff in the process. But it knocked out the removable link for King B Remix, so the battle didn't quite pass a minute, I don't think. Or if it did, then only barely. No. Again, it's worth saying that King B gets a slight moment in the Ascendancy where they hold Big Nipper over the arena spikes. Arguably, they were winning for about 10-15 seconds, but it was just another one of those Series 8 fights where a robot lost the safety link and that was it.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the fight King B Remix gets the most viciously beat down in, because it's the only one where there's a spinning weapon. But there was a genuine opportunity here for it to pit Big Nipper after the drive over the spike pit. Big Nipper backs away and gets very close to dropping down into the pit. Imagine that. King B gets a win against what has now turned into a rather explosive Big Nipper machine in Series 10. That would have been something for its track record.
And a former FRA champion too.
I'd love to see Big Nipper win a heat in Series 11 because they've got a robot capable now. It's fantastic. But this just goes to show, imagine Big Nipper's new Series 10 disc hitting King B Remix. They might have been out of the arena in comparison to how we saw them fly here. No, I'm obviously exaggerating there, but I think this fight is why we didn't have that great of expectations for Big Nipper in Series 10. We didn't realise just how much the disc had improved between Series 8 and 10, but they're legions apart. But nonetheless, the final fight becoming TR2. At this point, King B Powerworks, I think, is already eliminated, aren't they? Shaking my head, you called it King B Powerworks.
Sorry, King B Remix is already eliminated because Dan Tom Kia has got 2 wins and TR2's got 2 wins.
It was a needless battle.
So it's just a formality.
For both parties, in the sense that TR2 was already through and King B Remix was already out. And yet somehow they actually had to postpone this fight's filming by a day, because our buddy Jim Lad went to see it, but they had to do it a day later because King B Remix wasn't ready for this fight, which it didn't even need to do in the first place. But because it got to take part, King B went from a robot with an equal amount of wins and losses to a robot with more losses than wins, because they really didn't do much. So Killalot got its one money shot in the whole of Series 8 by holding it over the flame pit, and then TR2 just flips it into the pit. It didn't put up a hope.
I do like that it ends in a pitting, though, because I'm a big fan of the pit, and I would rather that than it just ending with the klaxon because time runs out or because they just said...
Yeah, and it was a very delicate pitting as well. They put King B right in front of it,
nice
then
pitting.
Flipped it onto its wheels so it just gravitated into the pit. It was, not to be a downer, I think this was a good fight. It was just one where, A, we already knew what was going to happen, and B, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter. It's almost like you watch that flipping into the pit, and that's the last of King B Powerworks. King B Remix, last of King B Remix, goes into the pit, and it's almost like they're passing it down into the ground before they bury it, because that's the end of the
Because indeed, we will never see Remix
the end of
again.
King B. So, what about the future of King B, Remix, Powerworks, whatever word you want to add on to the end? King B, Hobgoblin,
So we know
maybe?
that Simon Harrison has pretty much finished a new King B at this stage. It's still pretty much the same core design, but with new technologies that's hopefully going to make it more competitive. We don't know about the armor, but I'm presuming they're going to go with something that's actually going to protect it this time. And the intention is to put King B into Series 11 of Robot Wars. But what we do know as a guaranteed fact is that the new King B will be competing at Robo Games in America next year.
We also know for a fact from footage that Simon Harrison's posted on Facebook that the forks move significantly. Almost. I'm trying to think of almost like axe levels of movement. They actually move in quite abrupt
Yeah, you might even call them
movements.
a flipper, really.
Rather than the slow panic attack style lifter that King B had in the past. So it may be that it can, breach a ground clearance and actually get a flip now, as opposed to a slow lift that doesn't really get it anywhere. I just hope that it gets at least one win. But the problem with the new reboot function is that no one ever just gets one win now. You've either got to get one win and multiple losses, or that's why it's going to be so hard for it to claw back. Supernova's in the same category.
Yeah, I mean, Supernova at least has the potential to, with a good draw, at least even out its wins and losses. But King B is going to have a hard time winning a heat as long as they stick with that design. But I think Simon Harrison has accepted that and is probably fine with it. And we will love to see King B however they wish to come back.
That's right, and it's exactly like Ant Pritchard said about Bearmoth. Robot Wars wouldn't be the same without Bearmoth. Wouldn't be the same without King Buxton. Wouldn't be the same without John Reed. Wouldn't be the same without all those sorts of Team Cold Fusion. There are so many people that you just want to see back, and I don't care if they're not competitive. I don't care if they're going to lose easily. I'm just glad that they're there and they're still part of the Robot Wars canon for us to enjoy.
And I think that's a very nice note to end on.
So do I, actually, if I do say so. Nick, do you have any final thoughts?
Not really. I was just going to add to what you were going to say. I mean, in the modern form of Robot Wars, all of these high-end robots become so cynical and almost robotic in what they do, where it's very repetitive, similar types of vicious victories. Like you see Eruption carrying out these cynical out of the arenas. We know how destructive yet predictable Carbide is, and yet when you see Robot Wars, as entertaining and as great as it is to watch the high top tier robots, robots like King B are indispensable to the show, and teams like Simon Harrison and co. They are indispensable. Robot Wars started to get popular in the first place, not because the robots were good, but it was because of these teams who were trying this new thing out and loving having a go at it. And even though Robot Wars itself became more advanced and destructive over time, you saw people like Simon Harrison still persevere with it in some form because they loved the general philosophy behind Robot Wars, whether they were competitive or not. And you always want some part of that in the show, no matter how cynical things get in the arena itself.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And it's been nice to watch King B go from a super competitive Series 2 robot to which is essentially just we're so glad you showed up robot in Series 7 and 8. And I think that's large part of the reason why I haven't grown to be sick of it, because it's essentially a Rambot. It's essentially a 4-wheel drive Rambot like Storm 2 and Tornado and many other robots of that description who I usually don't enjoy their fights. And I think that sort of whimsical personality of the Roboteers and the robot has been a large part of that. So I hope that they keep coming back and we get to
However,
watch
Volvic will always be better than Buxton. Thank you very much.
I don't get that reference.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We'll end it there. Goodbye.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for having me. This has been our Robot Wars history podcast on King B, Powerworks, and Remix. And then you'll stay tuned for the next one. All right. So from all of us here, have a great day, and we'll see you next time.